Well, good morning, everyone. See if I can take this off. I think I won't project out that far with my vile germs and whatever I have. All right, so we're going to begin with talking about rejection for a little bit. Rejection, I think, is one of the most difficult things to deal with in our lives as human beings. And you can maybe think of times when you've been rejected. And, well, I'll just put it out there. What kind of dealings with rejection have you had? What different areas are there where it's really difficult to be rejected? Can you name some? Rosemary?
Not getting a job.
Right. Job, she said. That's a big one, I think. To get one of those rejection letters when you were pursuing a job you really wanted that says, sorry, but we've gone in a different direction. And you always think, that's not good. I really wanted that job, and now I got rejected. What else?
Girls for a date.
Girls, or boys, if you are a girl. Yeah, if you ask a girl out or something, if you're a young man or even an old man, I guess, and they say, no, I'm sorry, that is painful. And maybe girls and women don't realize how painful it is. Maybe they do, and they just don't care. But, but that can be very painful, rejection like that, and it works for women as well. You know, if there was some young man that they were pursuing and he just wasn't interested, that is a painful thing. Anything else that you can think of? Yes, Ramasani.
When some people are maybe a team of soccer or any kind of team, they are trying to get a good player or good player.
Right.
They always select, and if you qualify for some conditions are good, and if you don't qualify, they reject you.
Right. So Ramazani said if you're trying out for an athletic team, some sports team, and you don't make the list, it can be painful. I remember that for basketball when I was in junior high, that they posted a list of who made the team, and I went over that list several times because my name didn't seem to be on there. And I thought, surely it's got to be on there. But no, it wasn't there. And what does that make you think? Well, I'm not good enough, I guess. I thought I was better, but I wasn't, which is always difficult to deal with. Any other things you can think of? Yes, go ahead, Brother Charles.
When you fail an exam.
Oh, yes. When you fail an exam, he said, then you feel rejected. Especially if it's like an entrance exam or something to say if you were trying to get in medical school or something and you failed an exam, that can be pretty painful. Is there anything you can think of where go ahead, Grace? From a proposal? Yeah. There's all different kinds of proposals, like a marriage proposal, that would be awful. And sometimes that happens. Like people make big plans, a guy makes big plans to put it on the scoreboard or write it with airplane writing in the sky, will you marry me? And she said, no. And that's very painful, I think. Can you think of anything where it's good to be rejected? I could think of one thing. And that's when I was getting older and there was a draft. if you got a rejection notice from the draft, you'd say yes. Whether it was for medical reasons or whatever reason, if they said, no, you're not acceptable, that was a time to be joyful. But I can't think of too many other things where rejection is a good thing. It's mostly very disappointing, and sometimes it almost ruins people's lives when they get rejected. So we are going to talk about the stone that was rejected. But first, can you think of Bible? Well, you can think of a lot of them. I'm just going to name some people in the Bible that were rejected. Like Moses was rejected at first. And God pretty much forced the people to accept him as their prophet and leader. David was rejected at first. And he became a great king, and of course he had his problems, but he was a great king that some of the people didn't want to be king at first. Many of the prophets were rejected. In fact, almost all of the prophets at one point or another were rejected because their message was not something the people wanted to hear. They wanted to hear pleasing messages, and that's not what the prophets had to say most of the time. And of course, we're going to talk about Jesus, or the stone that was rejected, but certainly God was rejected over and over. So if you are rejected, you could be in good company if it was for the right reasons. Let's just look at one time that happened. This is 1 Samuel 8. For Samuel 8, and we'll just look at verse 7. And the Lord said to Samuel, hearken to the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. According to all the deeds which they have done to me, from the day I brought them out of Egypt, even to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are also doing to you. So yes, Samuel was being rejected, but God says it's really about me. And this happens to God over and over in Israel's history. He is rejected. So it's no wonder that his son is also rejected. And I dare say that we are going to experience more rejection in this world. And hopefully we're ready for it. We already experience that to some degree. It's very hard to preach the word and have people accept it willingly. It just doesn't happen very often. And the rejection is just not real bad for us right now anyway, but it's nothing like the apostles or the prophets of old. But I think we will be rejected by the world. And you might say, well, if we vote the right people into office, maybe that won't happen. I dare say it will happen, no matter what. Extremely right, left people, I think, tend to reject God, and extremely right people might be on the wrong track. I think, for example, the Pharisees and Sadducees were very conservative, right-wing people, and they were the ones that rejected Jesus. But certainly left people that I think their morals are way different from ours, they will also reject us. So I don't think there's any hope in the political world that we live in. We are, at some point are going to find no common ground with people. So I think rejection is inevitable. But now let's get to the subject at hand, which is the stone that was rejected. And as I started to think about this, I thought, this is a tough thing to understand, how a builder would reject a perfect cornerstone. Like, how could a perfect cornerstone come across the eyes of a builder and be rejected? If it's perfectly straight, perfect 90-degree angle, and it was smooth and whatever, builders look for in a cornerstone, you would think that a builder would be objective and say, this is perfect. I could make a great building starting with this cornerstone. So I was thinking to myself, how would a builder come to the conclusion that a perfect cornerstone could be rejected? So I brought something to help us out. It's my trusty knife collection, which comes in handy every once in a while. So I'm going to put 3 knives out here. And Nathan, since you're the presider, maybe you can, well, I won't speak well. That doesn't matter. It's not going to take that long. But yeah, that's what I did. Nathan, you want to come up and... Okay, Nathan, I want you to come up and examine those knives. You can open them and close them, do whatever you want. What I want you to do is figure out which is the best one. Which do you think is the prime knife? And there's one of them that is way better. I'll just tell you ahead of time. And I was thinking about this. I don't know that much about knives, really. I just happen to have a few. I don't know why, but I do. I collect them a little bit, but I'm not the greatest knife person in the world.
I've got one.
So Nathan is examining. He's not an expert on knives, are you?
No.
Okay. So which one did you pick?
The one with the patent.
The one with the what?
It has a patent on it.
Oh, it has a patent on it. I didn't even notice that. All right. So you can have a look at that. It is a pretty cool knife, I'll tell you. Look at this. It opens just with a flick of the wrist. But this is not the best knife. Good try. It is this one. And you know what? This one is maybe 3 times the price of those other 2. And can you guess why this is the best one? Well, this blade is like really good steel, for one. And, there's probably better knives with better steel, but it will hold its edge for a long, long time. And it'll stay sharp, which is what that means. And so you don't have to sharpen it very often. And it's got a very nice, smooth action on it, which you, I guess, didn't notice. But if you wanted to, you could just flick it open like that. And it stays in place. It's very nice. Okay, so those are 3 knives. And other knives are good too, but this one's way better. But as you can see, those three knives are pretty similar, right? And I would be happy with any of them. I use them when I go fishing and stuff to cut my line and whatever. And knives have some practical ability. The one knife that's the best, though, I tend to just put away and not use it. Does that make sense? No. Not to use the best knife of all, but I just don't want to wreck it. At some point, I'll get to where I do use it. But let's bring another one. Into the mix. Can you see what kind of knife this is?
The Swiss Army knife.
It's a Swiss Army knife, right? That's what Abigail said, and she is correct. Now, how's this knife different from those knives?
It's multi-purpose. It has like
Right.
10 different tools.
It does a whole bunch of things. I can tell you, well, there are some Swiss Army knives that cost a lot of money because they have so many different tools on them. This one was probably pretty expensive. But it has not only a nice blade on it for cutting. Yeah, just take my, yeah, I got it. It's not like those, but it does cut. It's fine for cutting. It also has this cool thing on it. Can you see what that is? It's a magnifying glass. Why would that be on here?
You can use it to start a fire.
Right. You can use it to start a fire. If the sun's out, you just focus this on some leaves. Boy, Abigail's really good at this. Do you collect knives, Abigail? Well, maybe we can get you started.
Okay.
And it's got all sorts of tools on it. But this knife is way different from those, right? And so if you put those with the other knives, I would be in a dilemma because I know those knives are only good for one thing, but this knife is good for lots of things. It's got screwdrivers on it. It's got different kinds of blades. It's got files. It's got all sorts of things. So depending on what you're trying to do, you know, this knife might be the best one for you. If you're going to be out in the wilderness for a long time and you had no other tools, this might be the best one. Yeah, those knives are good, but they only have one purpose. So if I put that knife there too, I would still be tempted to take, because that one knife that I showed you, which was the best of the three, cost a lot of money. And I would still be tempted to take that, even though the Swiss Army knife might be the best one for the purpose at hand. It just depends what I'm trying to do. So this is just an illustration of how the best thing might be rejected, even though the person that's using it knows about it, knows about what knives are like. And that's because it just has one purpose. It only cuts. It's only sharp. It's a good sharp knife, but the Swiss Army knife is much better for multi-purposes. So how could a builder then reject a cornerstone that is perfect? It's because I think he didn't realize what kind of building he was trying to build. I think it's a different structure that this cornerstone is the chief cornerstone of. It's not your typical building. So, like Solomon's temple was perfect, right? It was a perfect building pretty much because God gave him the instructions of how to build it. When David asked God if he could build a house for him, God said, well, I don't really need a house, but I'm going to build one for you. But he said, since it was in your mind, yes, you can go ahead and build a house for me, but you're not going to build it. Your son is going to build it. And that son was Solomon. And so he did build it. Let's take a look at a couple of verses pertaining to that temple which Solomon built. 1 Kings 5. Verses, I'll look at 17 and 18 of 1 Kings 5. At the king's command, they quarried out great costly stones in order to lay the foundation of the house with dressed stones. So Solomon's builders and Hiram's builders and the men of Gebal did the hewing and prepared the timber and the stone to build the house. And then in the next chapter, chapter 6, let's look at verse 7. When the house was built, it was with stone prepared at the quarry, so that neither hammer nor axe nor any tool of iron was heard in the temple while it was being built. So they prepared these stones ahead of time, and they were all chosen. I'm sure there were many stones that were rejected because they weren't just right for this temple, which God wanted to be perfect. And so they built this temple, and it was beautiful. When the Queen of Sheba came and she looked at all the buildings that Solomon had built, including the temple, she was amazed by all of this. But was that a suitable temple for us? It was the house of God, but were people like us invited into the house of God? If you came to the door of the temple and said, I'm ready to go in and see God, what would the doorkeeper say? Nope. He'd say, rejected, right? Are you the high priest? No. Then you're rejected. Are you a priest at all? If you weren't, rejected. You couldn't go into this house. It was not friendly to ordinary people. It was not even friendly to priests and high priests, really. They had to be very careful in God's house. They had to be careful to go in the right time, do the right things once they got in there, burn the right incense, offer the right sacrifices in the right way, or else they were in danger of losing their lives, as the sons of Aaron did in the very beginning. That was in the tabernacle, not the temple, but same rules applied. It was not friendly for people to be in there, which seems odd because Jesus says in John chapter 14, in verse 1, he says, let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? So this seems a huge contrast to this house of God that Solomon built. Jesus said, in my Father's house, there's many rooms. I think King James says mansions. And some people misunderstand what this is talking about. But he says there's plenty of room for everyone. And if you're God's children, of course there would be, right? There's room for everyone. So why the discrepancy? Why is one place so rigid and strict, and it doesn't even help if you take your shoes off before you go in. You can't go in at all. And this other one, it seems like it's wide open. There's many rooms, and Jesus says, I'm going to prepare one for each of you. But I think this is the whole key behind why the cornerstone was rejected, because this house of God is different. It's like way different. And there are many clues in the Bible that talk about this. First, let's see just about the whole idea of rejection in Matthew 11. Let's start reading at verse 27 of Matthew 11. All things have been delivered to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So I think Jesus is saying everybody's welcome to come. There's no rejection. And I'm going to get into this later. There is rejection in the end, but it's only if you reject God. But Jesus says, everyone come, because I'm going to offer you rest from all of your burdens. And I think that's the key thing to the house of God, that Jesus is built as the chief cornerstone, in that it is welcoming. It is a place that anyone can come. It's not a place where you can bring your sinful nature and just keep repeating the sins that you do, but it is a place that everyone can be relieved of their burdens. And when people come to the door, they're not rejected. They're welcomed and say, if you continue on this path, you will have your own room in this house. And I think there's many hints about this in the Bible, that this house is different. And I think I don't understand those. I didn't, and maybe I still don't. I don't know. But it's like this. If you put those 4 knives in front of me, like I said, I'd still be tempted to take the most expensive one, even though the one with all the useful little things would be more valuable in some situations. But let's look at Daniel 2. Because I think it's just a whole different structure that we're talking about, and it's put in different terms. And I don't think this is the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, and Daniel is interpreting it. And of course, if you remember, it is a great image of different metals, and the metals at the top were the most precious. And it finally goes down to feet of iron and clay. And so Daniel says, "You saw, O king, and behold a great image. This image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of the image was of fine gold, its breast and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. As you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hands, and it smote the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold all together were broken in pieces, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, so that a trace of them could not be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth." So that's what Daniel says that dream meant. So there was a stone, and it wasn't cut by human hands, just like Solomon's, but it appeared, destroyed the image, and then became a great mountain. So that's why I think the builders might have rejected the stone, because they didn't realize what kind of structure it was going to become. And it says clearly here, it's going to be a great mountain. That's what it's going to be. Well, let's continue on and look at Isaiah chapter 2. So that was Daniel 2. Now we're going to Isaiah chapter 2. This is a passage I tried to memorize at one point, and I didn't do that well at it, but I always got stuck on one part here. It says in verse 2 of chapter 2 in Isaiah, "It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised above the hills, and all the nations shall flow to it. And many people shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem." So the part I always got stuck with was the mountain part. I would always be tempted to say, "It shall come to pass in latter days that the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains," and I would forget to say the mountain of the house of the Lord. But I think that's really the key part, and that's why the builders didn't think of Jesus as the chief cornerstone, because this is a massive thing. It's a mountain. It's the mountain of the house of the Lord. And you may say, well, that's just a small distinction because you are going to have a house on there. Well, maybe not. I'm not sure. Maybe it's the mountain that is actually the house of the house of the Lord. There could be a structure on it. I'm not sure. But it clearly says it is the mountain of the house of the Lord. And I think there's other hints throughout the Bible that confirm this. And we'll talk about one in the end of this talk. But let's look at Psalm 118, where the passage actually comes from that Jesus quoted. David is going over how God saves him, from his enemies. In verse 10, he says, all nations surrounded me. In the name of the Lord, I cut them off. They surrounded me on every side. In the name of the Lord, I cut them off. They surrounded me like bees. They blazed like a fire of thorns. In the name of the Lord, I cut them off. I was pushed hard so that I was falling. But the Lord helped me. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. Hark, glad songs of victory in the tents of the righteous. The right hand of the Lord does valiantly. The right hand of the Lord is exalted. The right hand of the Lord does valiantly. I shall not die, but I shall live and recount the deeds of the Lord. The Lord has chastened me sorely, but he has not given me over to death. And now it's like he's painting a picture of this house that God has built. He says, this is the gate of the Lord. The righteous shall enter through it. And remember, in the original temple, that would not happen. I guess you could maybe get into the outer court, but not into the inner courts. He says, the stone which the builders rejected has become the head of the corner. So there you have this quote that Jesus says. And he says, this is the Lord's doing. It is marvelous in our eyes. This is the day which the Lord has made. This is a great song, which Sue was just singing to our grandkids the other day. But this is the context where that quote comes from. This is the day which the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Save us, we beseech thee, O Lord. O Lord, we beseech thee, give us success. Then he says, blessed be he who enters in the name of the Lord. We bless you from the house of the Lord. The Lord is God, and he has given us light. Bind the festal procession with branches up to the horns of the altar. Thou art my God, and I will give thanks to thee. Thou art my God, I will extol thee. O give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. So again, in this context, which we read that Jesus quoted, it says, the stone which the builders rejected has become the head cornerstone. I think earlier he talks about a large place that God has set him. So I think these are the terms we have to think in. That God, this is the cornerstone of a huge thing, a mountain. And we are the stones that are added to it. And so it's not your typical stones like they did for Solomon's temple. They made all those stones perfect. They cut them carefully, but this one's different. You know, a perfect stone for this structure might be different than it was for Solomon's temple. And they maybe don't start out looking so good, some of these stones, but they end up being perfected for this structure. So I think it's good for us to think in those terms of people that come to us looking for the Word of God. That we don't think of them as, well, like that really good knife. We don't think of them as, come in here and we'll put you to the knife, to the sharp knife that, you might be rejected because it's pretty sharp. It's pretty, it can be painful the way we might consider people that come to us. We don't want to be like that. We want to be like Jesus was when he said, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden. All of you come to me." And we'll sort out later who God thinks is worthy to be part of his kingdom. But for now, everyone. So the original temple was not suited for faithful people. And I think the reason is because in the heart of it, it had the 10 Commandments, right? It had the law of God. So it was not suitable. All that was going to be good for, was just like those 3 knives. It was only going to be good for cutting. But the new one that Jesus made, that's huge. It's like gigantic. And he accepts all those who come to him in humbleness. So I think that's what we have to consider when we come together. It's not about rejecting people. It's not about seeing how sharp our knife is so we can cut people off. It's about accepting people and letting God judge who is worthy to be part of his kingdom. And the only people that won't be worthy are those that reject him. All those who seek his kingdom and constantly look for it will be accepted. And there are, as Jesus said, there's many rooms in his Father's mansion, or in his Father's house. There are many mansions. So I guess there's hints about this throughout the Bible. I was thinking about the woman at the well, how the Samaritan woman expected Jesus to reject her because she was a woman and she was a Samaritan. But then they get into a discussion and she mentions a mountain, right? She says, our fathers worshipped on this mountain. And Jesus says, well, there's going to come a time when people won't worship here or in Jerusalem on that mountain, but they'll worship in spirit and truth. So this house, even though it's got a mountain as its base, it's different, and I think it's hard to describe, and it's hard to describe why, or what. It's not hard. What makes Jesus different and what makes him the right cornerstone for this house? I mean, we know why. Because he was perfect and he could bear the burden of the whole world. And that's what he's doing here. He's bearing the burden of a mountain on his back. So anyway, I was thinking about Matthew 17. And I'll just talk about that in closing then. Matthew is the part of my Bible that is really ready to disappear into thin air because it's so torn up. Matthew 17 and verse 20. Right, he said to them, because of your little faith, for truly I say to you, if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible to you. So when you look at it in this light, it's a little bit different. He says, if you say to a mountain, move, then it will move. And it's almost like saying, I'm telling you how to make your own room in this house of God. And you don't need these knives, you don't need stone cutters or whatever. You just need faith as a grain of mustard seed, and you can move a whole mountain. And so that's what we're here to remind ourselves, not of the rejection of this world, nor the way this world treats those who are trying to serve God. But we're trying to remind ourselves that we can move mountains, and that we are eventually going to see the mountain of the house of the Lord when Jesus returns. So the thing is for all of us to not reject each other first. That would be silly, right? Because all of us come here to worship God, and certainly to remain faithful to our Master and Savior Jesus. Thanks.